Hi all, I have another absolutely fascinating game of Leela chess to show you. This is against Houdini in TCEC Season 16, Premier Division, Round 26. So this is a 90 minutes with 5-second time control. The opening book given, Leela playing white, kicks off with e4. We have a Sicilian defense, and we go into the main line of the Sicilian. So here, after f4, knight bd7, this is the end of the book. And now, at this point, Leela actually chooses a hyper-aggressive move, g4. So this is in the style of Nesmetanov. I'm pretty sure Nesmetanov played like this, often with black as well, with g5 in reverse. So a very aggressive move. Bishop f3 has been seen before. There's a high-level game, Lev Sarkis against Julian Hodgson in Sochi 1987, which went like this, with the aggressive g4 though, so it can actually transpose from our current game. This is just one of the ideas. The bishop goes back to g2, and then f5. It's very aggressive play, getting a form pawn, and with that form pawn, it's very, very dangerous prospects for white for the attack. So, for example, this is an attempt at exposing the white king, not to allow just a comfortable blockade. And actually, white went in for that and just played the king to h3. And after that, it was black's king. That was really unsafe. After knight f4, threatening things like taking a knight g6 because of that pin. That's particularly nasty, knight g6. So black resigned there. So that kind of danger is lurking. So we see here an immediate d5. It can easily transpose into that kind of game if black castled. So we could easily transpose g5 and bishop f3 with the same sort of ideas. So yeah, black reacted immediately here after g4 with d5. So they say to counter a flank attack is often good to counter it in the center. That's an interesting general principle. And here white plays e5, black plays knight e4. White took this off, d takes, bishop e3. So a very interesting pawn structure. Black has the double pawns here in the center. You would think that e5 is a bit of a liability. Anytime f5, e5 is going to drop off. What could white actually do with this position if there isn't the thematic looking f5? So an interesting position to think about structurally. Queen c7. Here, if b5, you might think that's an idea to finish after the bishop. White could pounce with knight c6 and just get a very, very good position indeed, like this, for example. It would be really horrible, and the king would not be very safe, and there's all sorts of nasties like this happening. So that's to be avoided. So we have the preparation move queen c7 to cover c6 if b6 or b5 want to be played. Queen e1 and now b6. Here also b5 is a little bit ambitious for the position, it seems. White could play the undermining move a4, and here's c3. And for example, this position, if it gets to an endgame, king f2 is a key move, and white just sits much better in this endgame. Actually, the c8 bishop could be a real problem piece. So b6, rook d1, bishop b7, a4, restricting b5 anyway. Black castles. Queen g3, rook a8, c3, rook fe8. And now very, very interesting move g5. It's actually a longer term undermining underway, it seems, with this move, with the idea of h4, h5, g6. This would do two things. Either establish a form pawn and also undermine e6. And e6 could be a subject of attention from things like bishop g4 or queen h3, which would eye e6. So in a way, e6 is, trying to be weakened, as well as this structure in general. If the more energetic looking f5, queen takes, for example, bishop f4, this is actually very good for white. So black can't really play the queen takes variation. This is just horrible. but black can play knight takes e5, and with bishop d6, clever bishop d6, black actually might be at least equal. So f5 doesn't seem to do too much damage to the black position. Something worth checking out though, briefly. So g5, the slower approach to undermining, might be the more effective way. We have bishop f8, h4. Black's not really doing too much in this position. It's not the sort of classic razor sharp Sicilian counterplay on the queen side. It seems rather subdued and tied up. The bishop, it looks more like a French defense now with that bishop on b7. Knight c5. And with the pawn on e4, yeah, there's less counterplay it seems. Black's intention perhaps to liberate the bishop is noble, to kind of extend the bishop, maybe even a pawn sack, trying to weaken the king in principle. h5, and in fact knight d3 is played here. On g6, it seems one of the stronger moves might be queen h3, so that simultaneously eyes the diagonal, and with prospects, you know, maybe something like this as an example, or even king f2 sometimes in rook h1. The h file could be dangerous anyway. If knight takes here, rook d2 for example, this actually is another way of playing the position without even building up on the h file. This can get mega dangerous. Hg and f5. f5 here under these circumstances is extremely dangerous. So for example ef, then the h file there is nifty. Knight takes, and it can all crash through basically in this kind of scenario. It's all crashing through. So that would be horrible for black. So these scenarios exist, you know, with g6, yeah, queen h3. By the way, let's just have a look at this just for a moment again. If queen takes, there's knight takes e6 here. This is interesting stuff because now fg, threatening mate, and it's very difficult for black to defend. Threatening mate again. So it's just very difficult for black to defend this kind of scenario. Here, if f takes, just to show the dangers, fg, threatening queen h7, mate, and this is desperate for black. This kind of scenario is very, very desperate. So for example here, there's queen c3, that's crushing, like this for example. So interesting stuff on, you might think, you know, a logical move to block g6. It does seem as though white's got a lot of power to the attack here, starting off with queen h3, a key move queen h3. So we have knight d3. Okay, trying to sort of liberate this bishop on this diagonal, but it's kind of ignored. This bishop is contained by that pawn on e4. Why try and win a pawn here? Might be able to do better, and ignores it. g6. So keeping black contained is a key thing, minimizing the counterplay. F takes is played. On knight takes b2, then rook d2, and this position with g takes f5 is very dangerous. That threatens knight h6, by the way, because of that pinned pawn. So say the king went out of the way, knight d6, double attacking the queen, hitting the rook. It's all pretty nasty. This is just a disaster scenario for black. So that's on knight takes b2. It doesn't really bode well. So we have fg being played. So fg, hg, bishop d5, trying to protect e6 a little bit. Rook d2, perhaps on taking, black would leave that pawn there and king h8 as a sort of shield. So h6 is played though here. Now maybe there's some concerns with rook d2 building up on the h file. So yeah, h6 does seem to give a target. Bishop g4. So this e6 is being hammered now, as mentioned earlier. You know, potentially there's a lot of pressure building up because of that knight, especially on e6. But also you can see that this pawn could also be a target, the h6 pawn, under some circumstances, with, for example, this kind of thing going on. So let's see, Queen c4, Queen h3, things are getting aligned to the sensitive points of the black position. Bishop c5. Just to show the dangers here, if Queen c8, f5, that's a logical play for the alignment on the queen. This just looks, that'll be a ridiculous move from black anyway. But just to show the carnage, potentially. So bishop c5, and now bishop d1. Actually, this is cute. It threatens bishop b3, trapping the queen. Bishop takes d4 is played, which relinquishes, of course, the bishop pair. Is white going to be stronger than dark squares? If black doesn't play that, well, let's just put this on the board. Yeah, there's bishop b3 here. That's not going to be too clever, giving up the queen there. So bishop takes d4. If black wastes too much time, in general, there's all sorts of nasties here with bishop b3 anyway, this chain reaction. So black did commit to extinguishing bishop e3 to avoid pressure on d5, it seems. C takes, but now this does introduce rook c2 now sometimes. We have queen b4. If b5 here, rook c2 as an example, AB, bishop g4, and now f5 is strong. This scenario with rook g2, with the big threat sometimes of bishop takes and g7. So for example like this, shows how white could break through in spectacular fashion sometimes. Quite crushing. So queen b4, we have bishop g4, queen takes a4, queen in Siberia time, is it? Picking up this pawn over here. Rook g2, so white is getting ready for a smash through with f5 and bishop h6. Rook d7, f5, it looks horrible. Ef, bishop takes f5. But is it really about the king side? Now after rook c7, in fact, there isn't enough to sack on h6. White plays queen h4. White's actually going for the e4 pawn, funny enough, and the central pawns are pretty strong potentially. So that's a funny thing. It seems as though this was all about the attack, and now it's all about e4. If bishop takes, just to put this on the board, it really doesn't do anything. In fact, d4 drops. Rook g7, black's totally solid, it seems. So queen h4, just going for this center pawn, queen c4, rook g3. If bishop takes e4 immediately here, this position, there's rook takes e5, celebrating that pin, and that'd be at least equal for black. And if b3 here, this might be actually a good move, where white's getting the advantage similar to the game. White's taking out that e4, and if queen takes again, well, this is now dangerous. If queen takes b3 here, then bishop takes, this position is going to be absolutely winning. G7, that's absolutely desperate. Queen a2, but it's crashing through. The attack's crashing through here. If rook takes, then the attack crashes through like this, for example. That's check there, and that's pretty desperate. Okay, so dangerous for black's king, but rook g3 is played here, and now we have rook e7, b3, trying to nudge the queen away from this pin scenario. Queen c3 is played. If bishop takes e4 had been played instead, let's just check the pin again, put it on the board. Just knight takes e5, and black's getting a big advantage there. So the queen's got to be nudged away to be able to collect e4, so these centre pawns can become more prominent. So bishop takes e4. The centre pawns are becoming more emphasized now with this simplification, and of course there's this dreaded form pawn on g6, which is good for endgames to restrict the opponent's king. One of the natural tendencies of endgames is to sort of centralize the king. It's not going to happen here. White's all set with the centre pawns now as well. So knight b4. If queen takes b3 here, in fact bishop g5 is very strong. So not only it's not about d3 so much as well, there it's about d3. But if hg, can you see what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds, white's play. Clue, an alpha 0 stylish move in this position. Queen h1, yeah, dropping back for h7, and that's devastation for black. So after queen takes e4, yeah, knight b4 was played, treading carefully. But now rook f7, very dangerous for black's king. Queen c6. On rook takes, just to show here, white plays queen g6, and bishop g5, check, picks up the queen here. That's horrible. Things are falling off there. And in this line, if queen c7 instead after rook f7, then actually white plays like this and can threaten now nasties. For example, bishop g5 here for queen h3. That form pawn is really quite a menace, and the checks run out. Yeah, that's devastating for black. In this line, instead of queen takes d4, if rook takes, then check and mate there. So, okay, so rook f7, it's very dangerous to take there. And, yeah, queen c7 we mentioned. So queen c6 was played, queen f5, queen e6. If knight d5, white actually trebles and gains a common square for all these treble pieces. f8, rook f8 is devastating with the form pawn covering the escape squares. So if queen c8, and this is still devastating, with bishop takes h6, so if takes queen h7 is mate. And this is just no good for black. After rook h3, bishop f2, the queen's protecting the bishop, there's no tricks for black. That's it. So so here, if, by the way, knight takes e3, it'd be played, yeah, just put this on board, rook f8, and that's bait. So queen e6, and we have simplification now, rook takes. So no time for taking this, rook takes e8, and the queen would have to return back. So here, simplification. So this endgame, was this worth it to reach this destination? In one sense, don't you think there's a blockade square on d5 for the knight? In another sense, hasn't black got 2-1 over here? The king is much more active than black's king. That's one of the benefits of an endgame form pawn. The duality of a form pawn, not just the middle game, but now it's endgame hassle created and disruption. King f2, the king is celebrating it's much more active than the black king, and comes out and about. King f3, yeah, to centralize the king would mean d5 there, and the two pawns are going to be quite mobile. Knight d5, king e4, check, king drops back, knight d5, bishop c1. Here, I mean, it's a very, very good position, but even, you know, rook g1 is good. This kind of thing with the king, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on black's position. Very good position, but the idea of this, it seems, bishop a3, b5 to be able to answer with b4, bishop a3, it seems. Just to show, if a5, for example, we get this position with bishop a3, and then it just, yeah, this is kind of, the centre pawns will crash through. And in fact, look at the bishop, looking at g7 there, that's no defence for black. So b5, this does of course mean now that this pawn is a bit backward. This a6 pawn is a new target if white can get on the a file. Bishop d2, restricting the knight, b4, which gives of course the c4 square as an access now. King uses that for a moment. Rook g1, it looks very comfortable to play rook a1 against the backward pawn. Check, the king centralizes there, that was a tactical threat, knight takes e5. So getting out of that. Okay, bishop e3, but things are all getting set now for rook a1. Even more pressure. Check, black can only be a nuisance it seems. This pawn's now dropping off. Yeah, pawns are dropping off now. It's busted, and b4 now terribly weak. But, yeah, choice of pawns, taking out that, it's all over, bar the shouting. And in fact, this knight goes to h1. This is not the most active knight in the world. If it went to d3, then e6, for example, this position with d5 and check and taking the knight. So it'll be a bit of a liability there. So it goes to h1, but now it's locked out of the game with bishop h4. Pretty sadistic. Rook a8, rook f7, king d5, and the game ended here. So both sides thought it was like plus 10 for the last 10 ply. If it continues, as an example, rook d7 check, e6, these pawns are crashing through. There's so many passed pawns now. Yeah, they're all, it's just devastating, the passed pawns. So I thought that was quite an interesting game. I hope you found it interesting and kind of instructive as well. Very violent variations actually with g4 available against the Sicilian. So if you enjoyed this game video, please click on the top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member at Chess Mold and play other YouTubers. Or you can also follow that bit.ly link for convenience. There's a bit.ly link, bit.ly Chess Mold. And I'll be able to invite you for a game. If you register and follow up there, I'll be able to invite you for a game. I'm playing hundreds of games at the moment. There's also the Leela video playlist. I've set up bit.lys for quite a few things actually recently. So you can follow that format for, say, in small letters, Stockfish Chess, Kasparov Chess, Karpov Chess, Smyslov Chess. Name your world champion. If there's any famous players I haven't got on that format, please let me know. So yeah, my playlists have a bit of a faster access there via bit.ly now. Okay, thanks very much.